Hello and welcome to this special webinar sponsored by Orkin LLC, and our guest presenter today is Frank Meek. Today's subject is expecting the unexpected with your pest control. So welcome, Frank. Nice to have you along today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, and we always ask our guests, can you tell us where you're joining us from today?
I'm in our broadcast studios, actually, here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, and the weather today is?
Oh, hot and miserable.
Hot and miserable, right. But it's a bit humid and miserable here in rainy Manchester in the UK as well. So in the sidebar, tell us where you're joining us from today. Manoj, India. Tanya from Belgrade in Serbia. Yeah, just type in. Don't be shy. Let us know where you're joining us from. It's always nice to hear. So I'll be just in the background. I'll put Frank's slides on now, and then I'll be back for the Q&A later. But for now, I will hand you over to Frank.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. So, yeah, our topic today is kind of titled Expecting the Unexpected with Your Pest Control. But it's a little maybe vague about what we're going to talk about. So I've been in the pest management industry for 35 years, and I can't think of a time that is more challenging than today. And it's always been challenging when you're working with creatures that have adaptive abilities, evolving abilities, and many of them with conditioned learning responses. It's always been a challenge, but today has different challenges even beyond those biological challenges that our targets have. So I want to dive through some of those things today and just kind of give you some insight of what we're seeing as a pest control organization really around the world as related to maintaining food safety, food quality, facility quality, and all of these different things. So let's jump in here. If I can get my mouse over, there we go. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about some of these things. Now, setting the stage, the outcomes of 2020. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I get just a little sick of hearing all the challenges and problems we had last year. I'm ready to move on and move forward, but we have to really kind of look back and understand and embrace the changes that were forced upon us in many ways, but also learn from them. How can we improve process through some of the changes that we had to endure? And I think that's the goal or the challenge of all of us right now, and that we have, is to how can we take the changes, how can we take the things that happen and use them to our positive, use them to help us understand and just be even better than we already are. So we want to look at what some of those changes in activity were last year and how that affected us. I want to talk a little bit about some of the reactions. What are the things that have changed, and what are the things that as suppliers of service, but also from the regulatory, the auditing groups and such, what are some of those changes that last year put into place that turned out being pretty good practice? So we want to look at those things. We want to take a quick look at 2021. What is today like from our point of view, and what are the things that we can do to turn all of the turmoil into success? And then we should have a few minutes at the end of today for some questions and answers. So, if I say something that sparks a question, please chat it in, and we'll have some time at the end to dive into those, I trust. So let's start with a year ago, setting the stage. What happened last year? So, there was certainly a decrease in human activity in a lot of ways as movement restrictions and so forth kicked in countries around the world. We had less human movement Less people were in facilities, in offices, in manufacturing facilities. There was increased animal activity due to decreased human activity. We know that for a fact. Rodents that were kind of hidden came out because they realized that their threats were no longer there. There was some adjustments in how the auditing world had to handle protecting food quality, protecting the product that was being produced and sent out that everyone so desperately needed every place. So, that's kind of the changes. That's what this last year did to us. Decreased human activity. People stayed home. In manufacturing facilities, food processing facilities, there were changes in the cleaning habits maybe. You suddenly were focused on not only the regular cleaning, but you had to add disinfection on top of it, perhaps, to protect from the virus. So there was this whole change in cleaning processes that we saw in many places with additional things being done. Now, it was necessary, absolutely. And what happens sometimes in some situations is that additional cleaning may have added more moisture into some areas, may have added some conditions that made things a little better for pests in a few places, not a lot, but we did see that a little bit. There was a reduction in all services such as refuse management, trash pickup, removal, disposal, recycling, because people were not in those facilities working in all cases. So refuse was allowed to build up in some areas. Refuse that was there on whatever day before a company shut down may have still been there. I know here in our organization, March 17 was the day. March 17, they told us all, you now work from home because we can't be in our offices right now. So whatever trash was there from the evening of the 16th or the morning of the 17th was still there when people went back in. And I'm sure that's the same in many places. New storage space may have occurred as product went out, but without the supplies coming in to create more, there may be more open space in some places. Or the opposite, places ran out of space because they were bringing in so much more product to try to supply the need of the people. So space became a valuable commodity in a lot of places. There were areas that just people were no longer there in break rooms. You may have still had staff in place, but they may have been restricted from congregating in a break room or something like that. So food that had been left in there may have still been there and aged out and created issues that way. So there's just a lot of different things that happened, a lot of big challenges in that method or in that manner. Increased animal activity. So, like I said, we're dealing with animals here that have, many of them, this ability to develop conditioned learning, the ability to adapt, to evolve. The insects are the most successful organisms on the earth. They've been able to adapt and change their needs and behaviors over the eons to survive. So a short-term adaptation was not really a huge stretch for a lot of these things. But just like us, they had to move in many cases to find food resources. So where they were now or where they are now may not have been where they were a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So just that whole habitat, that whole habits of the animals may have changed and did change in a lot of areas, moved out trying to find the resources to live. See, every living animal on this earth, us included, requires 4 things. We have to have food, we have to have water, we have to have proper temperature, and we have to have shelter, a place to live, a place to stay. And all four of those have to be in the same area for the animal to live. So if the food went away in an area, those animals are going to adapt to a different type of food, or they're going to move, potentially migrate into an area where they can find that food. And we saw some of that happen, particularly with the rodent world, where populations were now out and in places that they never were before because there were no people, but there were resources. So all of those things created some very unique and interesting, from a scientist standpoint, some interesting challenges. And that's kind of what we look at and focus on, is the challenges of maintaining what has to happen to protect your product and your name and reputations. So all of these things are happened, and these are the challenges that got to us last year. Let's see, did I? Okay, so there were changes in audits. In some cases, the regulatory body had to change the way they do things. They, if they were coming out in person, well, they now were maybe doing virtual audits. We have an internal QA department that goes out to our customers and checks to make sure that they are audit ready and that our service is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing. And they had to move to a virtual platform, reviewing and doing the audits from paperwork and interviews, as opposed to on-site visual confirmation of compliances. And a lot of the regulatory systems had to do the same thing, go to that virtual platform to just review the documentation, review the paperwork, interview and talk to people to figure out, are you still doing the right things? Are you still complying with all the rules and the regulations that were out there? We saw a hybrid come up to where some of the audit was happening at distance virtually, but then there was still that maybe outside plant visit if it was close driving distance as opposed to flights. But that was an interesting thing that developed, was this hybrid audit where I can look at the outside, maybe I can go and talk to someone from a distance, but I'm still there getting a feel for the facility on the exterior. Or maybe I can get in and do a walk around without people in there on a shift change or something. And then in some cases, they just didn't happen at all. They were just stopped. So, that forced some changes in the approaches to food safety, that some of them actually maybe for the better. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But, I think some of these changes are good and should be continued in some ways. So, that's kind of what we're seeing as what's developing coming forward, the reaction to those changes in 2021. So in 2021, we started out the year still in this pandemic mode, and we're still there now. And we don't know what tomorrow brings us yet. But we know that in a lot of cases, we had to go back into a facility and restart a service, almost as if it was the very first time it had ever been serviced, because the pest had changed, the pest had moved, they have multiplied, or they changed. A different type of animal was there now. There were some new regulations that came into being in the audit world this year. And we had to adapt to those changes and increase some paperwork and documentation to cover those. And I'll speak to those in just a few slides. Maybe there were new suppliers to you, new suppliers of product, new suppliers of service because of a out of business or whatever happened to those suppliers. Risk management. We suddenly had to address risk management from a slightly different aspect. How can we make sure that we are completely clean, completely compliant with everything that needs to be done? Have my cleaning guys forgot the process? Have they forgot the value of doing the work that they are supposed to do? We had some new quarantine pests or the importance brought to us of quarantine pests this year. And we're looking at several of those that have impacted the way that we have to do our service. And then the audit, again, is something that we have to have looked at rebooting this year. Is how can we take the things that we learned and put them into good practice? So let's go through these kind of step by step. So change in service. Last year, a lot of the pest control service was either just skipped, not carried out at all, may have converted to exterior only type of applications or work to focus on, okay, let me make sure I can prevent anything else from coming in, and then we'll deal with whatever's inside when we're able to get back in there. There may have, and there were some limited indoor work that could be done. I know when we looked at things like healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities, these types of places, our service people could go in and maybe do the food service area and the exterior, but no place else. So because of that, we saw this increase now in pest activity in these unserviced areas because there was resources without control. So the pests moved and adapted to these newer environments. Services had to be skipped. And, let's face it, a lot of businesses just went away. So there was everything left in place that was allowed to just be there for the pests to chew on and eat and consume until it was gone. There may be supply changes. You may have had to change, as I said, the place where you bought product from to manufacture your goods. Your second string supplier may have become your first string supplier. You may have had a new pest control company or a new technician at that company. Maybe the same company was doing work for you, and not just in pest control, but in all of your services. Maybe the same company was there, but not all of the employees were still there because, let's face it, two terrible things happened. People were laid off, and unfortunately, people also died. So there's a lot of changes in place now that you've got to remanage and re-understand and really just kind of kick back off and get started again. A change of service may have happened. You may not have the same company that was out there. That technician may be different, like I said. So I just want to make sure that we drive the importance of making sure that you find good people to be doing your service now. What you had may not be available any longer. Look and find and make sure that you're getting what you need. New suppliers, we kind of talk through these things. There may be your old suppliers just may not be in business anymore. Your backup supplier may have become your primary. So now you've got to go out and find new backups, new secondary suppliers or tertiary suppliers. Will they allow you to come out and check them to make sure that they can supply your needs? Can you go there and check to make sure they can supply your needs? What type of service do they have? What's their delivery mechanisms? Are they capable of protecting the product that you depend on to get to your facility clean, uncontaminated, so that you can use it to create your material, your product, and be able to move that into market? So you've got to get back into looking at all of these different things that you were probably kind of hoping in some cases that you didn't have to do again, at least not right away. We're always looking for new suppliers, but maybe, we want to do those things on our time, not when we're forced into it sometimes. So These things take time, and this is something that has to be planned into your now reboot of operation if you're in that situation. New regulations. So SQF had an addition to their regulations this year, where there are new internal requirements for training, specifically as related to rodent control. So now your pest management provider has to, under the SQF protocols, has to document training to you or to your people to show where rodent control devices are, what to do when working around them, what to do if they get moved, what is the potential for any type of contaminants or anything like that. So all of that now has to be documented in your logs as part of your SQF inspection requirements. So, and when you're dealing with new suppliers, they may not all understand that new requirement. So make sure that that's being done in your facilities if you are audited or under SQF. Here in the United States, there were some new restrictions that hit us this year on what could be done as related to rodent control. One state here in the U.S., California, enacted some rules on banning the use of a lot of the rodenticide products. So it changed the approach into rodent management in that area. And we know that others are, other facility or other states, are looking at these types of changes as well. So it's an evolving change in the industry that affects all of us. You as the user of rodent management, but us as the supplier of rodent management. So we have to be aware of those and keep track on those. And I see some good questions coming in, so we will make sure we get to all those. And I think some of those we'll be answering as we get through the next several slides. Okay. Risk management. So, there's a new kind of buzzword, if you will, if I can use that term, in the audit world, and that is risk assessment and risk analysis. And those are now a huge part of pest management, but it's also a huge part of your production of materials. What's the difference between a risk assessment and a risk analysis? They are not the same thing, even though we often use those words interchangeably, but those are two different things. What is the difference? A risk assessment is simply an understanding of the potential risk. It is a visual identification of this is something that could potentially cause an introduction of a foreign object. This is something that potentially could create a product contamination of something. The risk analysis is taking that assessment, breaking it down, and then implementing steps to stop or to break that potential risk exposure. So a risk assessment, it has to be done first to identify the areas of risk, and then the analysis takes that assessment, breaks it down, and puts the proper steps in place to prevent it from happening. So that's the difference. So if someone is only offering or doing a risk assessment, it's no good without that continued analysis to identify what to do next. Okay? When should these be done? Well, they should be done certainly before service starts. They should be done routinely throughout a service schedule, a service protocol. So we want to always do a risk analysis and a risk assessment annually because things change. Depending on where you are, that might need to be done seasonally, 2 or 3 times a year as the seasons change, because the seasonality outdoors often dictates what our pest pressures are. So that risk assessment and risk analysis should be done ongoing, routinely, with a full formal analysis being done at minimum annually and more often as needed. Now, who should do those? These types of things should be done as a joint effort between your suppliers and yourself, because the analysis to fix the issue or to prevent the issues from happening quite often involve work that we can't do as a supplier. It may be physical maintenance. It may be a change in something about your facility, air pressure changes, lighting changes that require your team to do some of that type of thing. So that should be done as a joint project between you and your suppliers. The audit expectations now state in many of these third-party audits that the placement of control devices is based on the information obtained in the risk assessment and risk analysis. There's very little of the thou shalt put a device every 16 meters or 50 feet. It's based on what's needed as opposed to just an arbitrary figure of where things are supposed to be. So the audit expectations are now built on this risk assessment and risk analysis as what needs to be done as a risk management program. It's based on what needs to be done to mitigate the risk. And that's a change that's happened over the last couple of years that we've got to adapt to and work in. Now, quarantine pest. There's been quarantine pests for a long time, and there are a lot of quarantine pests still out there. I know currently things like here in the U.S., spotted lanternfly is one. It's an agricultural insect that can move indoors periodically just because nature's there butting up against our building and they can come in. Brown marmorated stink bugs, kudzu bugs. These are some examples of the more recent quarantine pests. Pests are invasive, and there's always this movement into other areas by pests through commerce. We look at examples of like some of the mosquitoes. Some of the mosquitoes were introduced into new environments strictly through commerce, and now they are endemic in areas and creating disease problems and issues. Other pests, such as the brown marmorated stink bug that we have there, on the screen, that's an agricultural pest that can do some huge damage to some crops. So making sure that you are not introducing that insect into an environment where it's not currently in another country or another region of the country makes it a quarantine pest. It requires additional steps to examine and to put in steps to prevent that insect or that organism from being moved. So that's kind of what we mean by quarantine pest. And these things change as we as we eliminate one or reduce one down to a manageable point, another one comes in. So we're always looking at these and figuring out what's the best way to prevent that spread from where they are to where they are not needed, where we don't want them to be. Now, go back to the audit for a second for this slide. So that, what's next in the list of things for 21? Well, the auditors are coming back, and that's a great thing. I love working with the auditors. I've been an auditor myself, and you have to understand the value of that audit and what it can do for you if you use it correctly. They are going to come back in person. We have heard from several agencies that have said, yes, we are going to have our people back out there going through things. We've heard from some that say, yeah, we kind of like this blended thing where we're doing some on site and some virtual, because we can reduce now the time that it takes to do that on site by doing some of the paperwork and such on a virtual platform. So they see some advantages to that blended audit working in many places. And I kind of like that. I think it's a good thing. All virtual, I think we'll start seeing a lot of that all virtual go away and go to more of this blended approach. but there may still be some virtual audits that occur out there in certain situations. So the full in-person audit, we know that's going to come back soon. We've heard from these agencies, as I said, that they're going back to that. Some will be unannounced. Some will be announced, of course, ahead of time. But the take-home message here is, you know who you have to work with in these third-party audits. Be ready for them. We want, at least, our clients, we want them to be ready to see that auditor every day, every hour, every minute. Everything should always be ready for that surprise visit, that surprise inspection that pops up, because you never know when that's going to happen. So we want that to be the take home, and the message is, work with your suppliers to make sure that you are ready every day for that audit to come up. They've got a lot of catching up to do, and they're going to do it. So let's be ready for them so that we don't have any issues or concerns that get handed to us. Okay. So, what are the things that we can do to help you find success, or that you can do to help find success? We talk a lot in our pest control industry about IPM, integrated pest management. And that is certainly the approach of pest management today. It has to be. 35 years ago, I know when I started out in this business, it was very heavily focused on the use of chemistry. Spray it down, something to walk on it and die. Just massive uses of pesticide. And that's not good for anything. That's not good for us. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the insect world. It causes a lot of change and adaptations in that micro world to make the service even harder. Now, one of the challenges, I think, with IPM, integrated pest management, in today's world is understanding exactly what it is. If I have a room of, let's say, 100 different pest control companies, and I ask them to write down what is IPM, I think we would probably get about 90 different answers, because everyone has their own idea of what it is. You'll hear everything from, well, it's pest control without chemicals. It's pest control using some chemicals, but only those little green natural things, not, the real good stuff. You'll hear, well, it's use traps and then spray it when I need to. So everyone has their own understanding of what it means. I want us to think about integrated pest management in this way, and this is what we try to teach our teams out there anyway, is to think of it this way. IPM, I equate that with going to see the doctor. Okay, let me explain. So I know that I've got a problem, and so I go to the doctor to get it fixed. I have a pain in my shoulder or whatever, and so I go to see a doctor to get that taken care of. So the doctor first does after you fill out all the paperwork and answer all the questions and everything, their first step is to do an assessment. So that assessment is going to determine, okay, what is the physical condition? What is the problem? What potentially is causing that problem? That's the assessment that they do. They're assessing the situation. Now, in pest management, we call that an inspection, but it's an assessment. It's an assessment of a facility. What is the problem? What causes the problem? And what are the options to remediate that problem? That's the assessment or the inspection from pest control. Now, once the doctor determines what's best to do for my shoulder, they're going to implement a solution based on their observation of my shoulder. Now, that solution may be physical therapy, exercise. It may be taking a medication, whatever. but they're going to implement a control solution or a fix based on the assessment. Pest management does the same thing. Proper IPM takes that assessment, determines what is needed here at this place to remove the current problem and to prevent it from happening again. Let's put that in place based on the assessment and based on the facility. The same way the doctor puts in a treatment based on my condition, what the x-rays show or whatever. And then every doctor I think that I've ever been to has kind of told me the same thing. Do this, come back in 2 weeks, and let's check to make sure it worked. So they're monitoring the effectiveness of the treatment. And proper IPM does the same thing. Let's take the assessment of the situation, implement a solution based on what we saw, what we observed, and then let's monitor to make sure that it worked. Come back and check. Come back and look at the work that we did. Did it solve the problem? Is it enough to prevent this problem from happening again? Modify as necessary and keep on monitoring. So IPM, I think, follows that same track of reasoning as going to the doctor. Determine what is wrong, put in a solution, and then make sure it worked. And then, of course, you have the documentation part of it that all the legalese require that's there. So we document everything that was done and keep that up until we have the next assessment that may change the treatment. So it's an ongoing cycle. It's not a one-time event. It's something that continues to change and to evolve as time goes forward. So that's what IPM is, and that's how we look at it. That's, I think, the best way for you to take to your supplier to say, does this make sense? Are you doing these things? Because that's what it takes to successfully solve a problem, but more importantly, to prevent it from coming back. IPM is based on prevention. If I have to solve a cockroach problem somewhere, it's too late. Damage has already been done. If I have to solve a rat problem, it's too late. How can I prevent it from happening? That's what I want to focus on. And that's what should be focused on in your facilities is how do we prevent these problems from coming up and giving you a bad name, potentially, having bad press or anything like that. So the components of this successful approach is understanding the steps. We call it AIM, assess, implement, and monitor, same as IPM. We understand that it has to be a team effort. We cannot do 100%. We being in the service side, we cannot do 100% of the things that are necessary to prevent the problems from happening again. That's the partnership to come in place. Can we point out the areas that you can improve something that will reduce your pest risk? Record keeping, documentation is so critical today in every aspect. So we have to make sure that everything is documented thoroughly. Because of the virtual audit world, that's what they have to go by right now in many cases as to what you're doing. So if that documentation does not adequately reflect the work that you and your suppliers are doing, it's worthless. So the good, proper documentation, the understanding of the partnership, it's a team effort that has to happen that way. Those are the parts of a successful plan. Not looking at just the inside, but where did they come from? Was it the outside? Was it the truck that dropped off the supplies? Track that problem all the way back to its source. And that source may be 3 or 4 transfer points ago. So finding out where the problems came from and addressing them all the way through the line is what it takes to have a successful IPM plan in your facility. So make sure that you're working with people that can do those things, that can provide that. Now, why go to this IPM? Well, plain and simple, it's been proven to work. And we know that there's a lot of research that has been done that proves the results of a properly implemented IPM plan and protocol. It certainly has the ability to increase the safety of the environments, the cleanliness of the environments. And when we talk about environments, we're talking about certainly the grand environment outdoors, but we're also talking about those macro environments inside. Those are so critical and so often overlooked. So we know that IPM helps make those things better. It can reduce health threats. Pests can carry disease and do carry disease. The fly and the fly family, which includes mosquitoes, they're the deadliest insects on this earth. They've killed more people than every war ever fought. The mosquito is number one. The fly, I think, is still number two from the amount of death that it's caused. So we know that good IPM can certainly improve the health of the environment, both the grand and the micro environment inside. We know that regulations and standards are going to keep changing. They're going to keep improving. As one organization makes a change, we know that others historically will make the same change as well. So that's going to continue to evolve and continue to become something that we've got to pay attention to. And then, we're all in business for some basic reasons. It's to have a bottom line, whether you're a publicly traded company and you've got stockholders that you have to answer to, or a private company that needs to make sure they're being profitable to continue on their company. That bottom line is what we're all in business for. And a good reputation combined with a good product creates a good bottom line. A bad reputation can kill that bottom line very quickly. And a bad reputation can be developed through not having proper pest management, not having proper sanitation controls. All of those things can certainly go to damage a reputation that can impact that bottom line that we're all out for. Now, we talked this a little bit about this being a team effort. All the employees inside a food plant should really understand what they do and how it impacts the IPM process. How does what they do potentially impact the quality of the finished product? Are they, if we look at an HACCP kind of mentality and standpoint, are they, or is their position, or is their job a point where a contaminant can be introduced into the system? What is the value that they bring to the quality of that finished item to make it what you want it to be? So they all need to understand their role in the processes, but also in your product. You want to establish some internal inspections and protocols, reporting protocols if you don't have those in place. Empower the people inside a facility to report problems. If they see something, say something, as the old security phrase is now. So let's make sure that they understand that information is valuable to making sure that your bottom line is protected and your reputation is protected. Ask for assistance. Ask your pest control provider to come in and do training for your team. Ask them to come in and talk about cockroaches or talk about sanitation or cleaning or maintenance as related to pest management. And then, make sure that people just know what the issues are. What are the things of concern, and how can we stop them? Give them the information and empower them to act on it, to report it, so that those things can be fixed. Now, ongoing monitoring is critical inside this service, and it's something that we need to talk about just a little bit. There's all different types of monitoring devices that can be used in pest management. The same as there are monitoring devices in a food system to check the quality of the product, the contamination of the product. There's these ongoing monitor things. In pest management, we utilize a lot of things such as pheromone traps in the right situation to detect the presence early of certain types of pests. We may use something called ILTs, insect light traps. The newest innovations in that world are the use of LED as opposed to the old mercury fluorescent tubes. And that's a new market area that has been out for several years now, but it is still relatively new and unknown. It improves the environmental aspects because you no longer have a toxic substance, mercury, to worry about disposal of. So embracing some of that new technology helps us monitor in a more environmentally friendly fashion. Using glue boards and traps to monitor insect movement and encroachment. Utilize something called site logs. And if you are not familiar with a site log or that terminology, let's explain that for just a minute. A site log is simply a document or a place for an employee to write down details of a sighting of a pest. So typically you want a site log to say, on this day at this time, I saw X. Written description of it, it looked like a cockroach. It was in this area specifically. Where specifically were they standing when they saw it? Now, one of the dangers that we run into sometimes with a site log is, and I'd rather have this danger, I don't mind this danger at all because it means that the system is working, but sometimes you'll get 10 reports from 10 different people of a cockroach and it was the same cockroach. But that's okay. As long as the information is detailed, we can narrow that down and determine that this was not a big problem. This was an isolated event. Just many people saw it, which makes it a problem. So, but have a site log system in place. Empower the team in your facilities to write down the information and work with your supplier, your pest control supplier, to determine what is the right information that they need. Okay. Part of IPM today focuses on target treatments of pesticides. The use of pesticides is still there and it's still allowed in an IPM situation. So, but it has to be targeted to the situation. It should not ever just be routine application of goods or products. It should be done when there's a need for it, not as a routine. One of the things that just makes me cringe a little bit when I read a document of a scope of service or scope of work is spray the outside every month. Why? Is it needed? Are pests coming in that often to require that application? Let's evaluate it and do it as it's needed, not as a routine. That is proper stewardship of pesticides. That is proper care for the environment outside, is doing treatment as it's needed as opposed to routinely. Using the right type of products, using the materials that are the least potentially harmful to nature, to the environment outside, to the animals living in that environment, to the beneficial things. Choosing a service, a treatment plan correctly is critical today. Making sure that that everyone understands the guidelines of what can and can't be done someplace, and documentation. I stress documentation so much because it's so critical. You know, the saying is, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So documentation is absolutely critical for everything we do. And it should include some basic information, dates, what it was for, what pest were you treating for? What were the conditions there that made it possible for this pest to even be there? Where were treatments done? All this data goes into helping us then do trend analysis so that we can become proactive at preventing problems. And that's the whole point of this documentation and data, is certainly to justify what was done, but more importantly, to collect information so that you can get to that place of prevention, of preventing these problems from happening and having to go through the hoops and bells and whistles of getting it solved. That's the point of good, thorough, proper documentation, is to allow you to start predicting what can happen and make sure that it doesn't. Okay. So as we wrap up here, just some do's and don'ts, that we always want to talk about just for a minute. Focus on your facility, not only the processing area indoors, but the environment around the outside. What's going on the outside will always affect what's happening on the inside. So make sure that that you're focusing inside and out. Use the technology that's developed over the last 18 months, the virtual world. Use it for the benefit. I know I've done a lot of inspections with branches throughout the a lot of inspections with branches throughout the U.S. this year I've done while they were walking around inside the facility with their phone camera showing me what they're looking at, and me telling them, okay, go look over here at this thing. What do you see? So use the technology that's been developed over the last 12, 18 months or become more commonplace for us. They're good tools, and we continue to work with figuring out how to make them even better. Couple of don'ts. Don't try to do this all this type of work by yourself. Get a partner that can help you, someone that understands your business and understands the proper way to protect your business from issues. And don't put it off. If you're in a situation of starting back up, don't say, well, I'll get started back up and then I'll bring the pest control guys back in. Get them in right up front to help get things, completely operational day one for you. So that's our message is, reach out, use your partners, and work as a team to solve problems, but more importantly today, to prevent those problems from ever coming back and causing you more grief. And so with that, I thank you very much, and I think we have a few minutes for a few questions.
Yes, we do. We do, Frank. So let's see. End here. First, scrolling way down, we've got a lot of questions. Any recommendations for dealing with geckos? Have you got any experience with geckos?
Geckos. Frank? Yeah. So, we actually get that question quite a bit, particularly in the tropics. Again, we said that every animal needs 4 things to survive: food, water, shelter, and proper temperatures. When you're dealing with things like geckos, lizards, snakes, spiders even, when you're dealing with these types of things, the best approach is to reduce their food supply, which are insects in a lot of cases. So if those geckos are there eating something, remove it. An animal's not going to stay where there is not a proper food supply. Will it make them all go away? No. Will it reduce the number that you see? Yes. Okay.
Super. Thomas, yes, you will receive a copy of this webinar. Just to say, everybody, afterwards, a couple of hours afterwards, you'll get the recording of the webinar, copy of the slides, and you'll also get a certificate of attendance. So, okay. Bilal, we're seeing so many sorry, I can't say that. I'll have a go. Spherosauride fly in our plant. It is normal during summertime, Vancouver, British Columbia.
So those flies are typically related to sanitation conditions outdoors. So look at what's outside, look at what's in the surrounding areas around your facility, and to see what's causing that increase. And then what can you do to prevent them from coming into your place? Make sure the air pressure is right inside, positive air pressure versus negative. Lighting is good, and more importantly, that traps and monitors are in place at entryways to find out early that they're coming in.
Okay, thanks. Question mark, or is it an answer? What is quarantine pest? Can you provide examples of quarantine pest?
Okay, yeah, we talked a little bit about some of those. So like the brown marmorated stink bugs, kudzu bugs. This year and last year was a huge emphasis on something called the spotted lanternfly in the Northeast United States. Quarantine pests are anything that is unwanted in your area or is unwanted in someone else's area that you have to make sure is not being shipped to there. So, the brown marmorated stink bugs are the ones that come to mind quickly because so many programs were implemented to prevent the export of goods from the U.S. that contained that insect inside them. Another one is nematodes. So the entire ISPM 15 phytosanitary program was built around preventing nematodes from being introduced into other countries through the wood in pallets. So that's some of the more common ones that we deal with right now.
Okay, thanks, Frank. And Michelle, when you say supplier, do you mean my pest control supplier?
Well, we talked about really two different suppliers there. So, as we move into 2021 or halfway through 2021 now, but, as this year came on, you may have had to change suppliers of product, suppliers of ingredients, suppliers of packaging or whatever, but you also may have had to change pest control suppliers or any other service supplier, refuse pickup suppliers, heating, air conditioning, HVAC suppliers. So suppliers we kind of use as a generic term for anyone supplying service to your facility. You may have had to go through changes there.
Okay, and Thais, we don't have suppliers since we are only providing warehousing and cross-docking services. With whom should I run this assessment? Thank you.
Yeah, so suppliers, you're only providing warehousing and cross-docking services. So you have suppliers, you buy some materials from someone, but also if you're cross-docking, you're bringing product in one side and out the other side, so to speak. Are the people bringing those goods into your facility, are those trucks clean? Are those trucks introducing contaminant into your facility that can then cross into something else and go off to someplace else? So you have to look at suppliers as not only those sending you goods that you're going to use in manufacturing, but the people that you are paying or that are paying you to accommodate their materials. So in your case, that might be who you're buying racking from, who you're buying moving equipment from, slip sheets to go on pallets, any of those sort of things. So think about suppliers in a more broad sense of the word. It's anyone that's putting something into your facility.
Yep, good stuff. Christina, is it strategic to put the electronic fly killer at the entrance of the facility? Would it not attract more flies is there a standard height for the installation of EFKs?
Yeah, so, first EFKs are something that are still used. We try to focus more on ILTs because an EFK makes it really hard sometimes to identify what it was. An EFK is the old EFK stands for electronic fly killer. That's the old zapper, so to speak. And as an entomologist, it's a little tough to look at the body parts sometimes and quickly identify what it was. So we like ILTs better because it allows us to analyze and understand the problem and create a better solution. But the general rule of thumb is if you can see an insect light trap or an EFK from the exterior, it's not good. One, because it's competing with a greater source of ultraviolet light, the sun. And two, there is that potential for attraction from outside. So if you can see it from the outside, it's not a great placement. The height typically, depending on what you're going for, what type of pest you're monitoring for, if it's house flies, most common, that device really needs to be in that 2-meter sort of range off of the floor. That's the height that most flies are traveling at when they're questing for food and questing for breeding grounds. Now, if your problem is nighttime flying insects, then maybe 3 meters high is the proper height. If the only pest you're worried about is the nighttime flyers, like the moths and things like that that come in after dark. So the proper height and the proper placement is all based on what you're trying to catch and the design of your facility. So your pest management provider should be able to analyze that and determine what is the best type of device and placement based on the target and your location. But those are general rules, like I said, that we want to abide by as much as possible. Not visible from the exterior and in that 2-meter range for the majority of flying insects off the floor.
That's clear. Thanks. Patricia, about internal training requirements, what are the elements that we must ask our company in charge of pest control to be in good standing?
So, some of that's going to be determined by what third-party auditing group comes in. But I think every one of them that I've worked with over the years have had the same general thing. Is like, your pest controller should be able to supply you training on understanding the importance of IPM, the importance of proper sanitation and maintenance to prevent pest introduction and potential pest and biological contamination from pest. So the newer regulations under SQF focus specifically on rodents. So what are the things that your staff in your facility need to do to make sure that those rodent control devices, whether they're bait stations on the exterior or traps on the interior, what do they need to know to not mess up that control program that your pest controller has put in place? So that's probably the two biggest areas: rodent management and proper IPM that you should always have someone looking at. If you're in the hotel industry, you want someone coming in talking to your staff about bed bugs or mosquitoes. If you're in the food processing industry, you want someone talking about stored product insects, sanitation and maintenance, HACCP, and how pest management helps you in your HACCP program.
Okay, super. Not that you need it, but I'm going to give you a bit of motivation to carry on answering these questions. Stuart says, excellent program, and Nazir, great material in presentation. So there you go, a couple of bits of feedback. Now, another question from FM Aminuzaman. How to detect a quarantine pest in a production area, how to prevent entry of a quarantine pest in a production area.
Okay. So, first is to get an understanding of what exactly the pest of concern is, how does it move, and how would it potentially enter? And then focus on those points of entry. So let's say in the case of nematodes, just as an example, every pallet that comes in, if nematodes are a pest of quarantine concern in your country, every pallet that comes in should have an ISPM 15 stamp on it that shows that it's been treated and certified free of that pest. If it's something like a beetle or a moth or something along those lines, it may be breaking down pallets of goods as they come in the door. Don't unload off the truck and put it straight into inventory. Bring it into a quarantine zone, break it down, inspect, make sure that it's clean and meets your standards, If no, back on the truck and back to the supplier. Or
Yeah.
if yes, in the system.
Okay, thanks. Question from Ebo. Any IPM project topics available to be carried out in a food industry? Does that make sense, that question? Any
IPM project topics available. So is there training maybe that you're asking about on what?
Yeah, possibly.
What type of training programs there are in the food industry for that?
Which you've just covered, really, didn't you? The different elements of a training. If you want to expand on that, Ebo, feel free to do so, and we'll try and answer. Dominic, what new regulatory and third-party audits are changing? Obviously.
Okay. So, as we said, we know that SQF is implemented this new requirements, and really it's for pest controllers, but it's also for the customer itself to make sure they have the rodent management information documented, that the information about protecting them and preventing the materials from moving and all that, to make sure that that's been documented. Most of the changes that we see are in the documentation right now, not in physical practice. A couple of years ago, we saw the move from mandatory distancing of rodent control devices on the interior and exterior. We saw that change in the audit world, going to risk assessment, risk analysis based, as opposed to distance based. And that was the last really huge change. But now we see this new documentation changes coming on. And I just a gut feel based on my interaction with these various agencies and experience with them, is when one of them makes a change in a documentary process, it'll rattle through and all of them will pick it up at some point in time. And then those will continue to be expanded upon, most likely. Some of that was in relation to the changes in handling rodenticides in some areas. So as use regulations change, then the auditing regulations or auditing concepts will change to match product use regulatory changes as well. So stay up to date on that side of it, and that will allow you to predict what the next changes are going to be in the audit world, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading this long comment from Dan. It's not really a question, but basically he's saying he agrees that scheduled treatments are not the way to go, but to say only use pesticides when all other options have been exhausted and deemed ineffective implies you never use pesticides. And then he finishes off. The point is, whether it is a pesticide or a drain cleaner, you use it when deemed necessary within an overall pest management program. Do you concur with that, Frank?
Yes. So, and to say that you never use a pesticide is I think a stretch. As a pest control company, we're able to do a lot without the use of pesticides, but there's a lot that we still have to do it for. To properly control or prevent cockroaches from coming in, I still have to use a little bit of pesticides sometimes, such as bait materials placed in potential harborage areas. That's a pesticide application, but it's an IPM approach because I've exhausted my other options before then. If you're in the organic world, that's a completely different, ball of wax, as we say, everything has to start with the non-chemical and then move through steps of failure before a chemical can be introduced. So in some industries, you're absolutely right. You hope to never get to that point of making an application. In some places, it is part of the IPM solution is to make a judicious choice of a pesticide application when needed.
Okay, thanks. Mariana, if we are only allowed to use all natural pest control baits and options, what is the argument for working with a partner like Orkin over creating your own program?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Pest management IPM pest management focuses on the knowledge of the pest. It's all based on the biology and habits of the animals and the targets. So the understanding of that pest biology is something that, maybe a facility won't have internally, to be able to place the right material in the right spot to eliminate that threat before it becomes an issue. Now, when you talk about using only natural pest control products and options, such as in a organic facility, a proper pest controller, Orkin as an example, since you said it, is understanding the requirements of that industry and being able to manage the pest for you and keep you in compliance with that industry standard. Having a good partner removes your liability at compliance. As long as they understand what to do, it relieves you of that reliability, that liability of the exposure. If we fail, it's our fault. If we've worked together.
Yeah.
That's the value of the partnership, is getting that extra set of eyes and that extra knowledge of the pest, the regulatory side, and what's necessary to manage that in the middle.
Yeah. Very good. And then a hat trick of nice comments. Michael, Claudia, Milda, great presentation. Thank you, all of them. So on to the next one. From Carolyn, what is your experience on how to deter wild birds?
Yeah. So yeah, birds are fun. I like working with birds. They're such an amazing animal. But bird management is habitat control. It's never killing birds. First off, the majority of birds in the world are protected, so they should not ever be killed. It's managing the habitat to make it less inviting to pest birds. So that might be changing or altering a structure to take away their landing zones. That might be setting up some type of deterrent that keeps them off of an awning or off of a building. Most of those deterrents are physically based, meaning nets, building modification. The bird spikes and all those things are out there. I don't necessarily like them a whole lot. They are a tool, but they're not a tool that is successful every time. So understanding, first off, what type of bird it is, surveying the area to make sure that you have all the legal issues involved, and then modifying the habitat to prevent them from wanting to be at your facility.
Okay, thank you. Still a lot of questions. Okay, Fatima, cigarette beetles. Any recommendations for preventing those?
Yeah, so that kind of comes into your supply chain and looking at how did they get into your facility, what product up the line introduced them into your place, and working that backwards. So you start out with what product are they in? At what point in the system did they get into that material? I'm currently working with a large international company here in the U.S., helping them analyze that supply chain for the presence of a stored product insect. And it's looking at that all the way back to the raw supplier in the field 2 countries out someplace. So analyzing that supply stream for the material that's infested or the material that is of concern. At what point did it get in there? And what can you do, or what can you require of your suppliers to make sure that it is not in there? Proper procedures for receiving. Like I said, don't just offload a truck and toss it right into inventory. offload, evaluate, analyze, inspect, and then determine if it's infested before it gets there. Okay. Look at that truck. Does that truck belong to your supplier or is it rented? Are there requirements in place for the cleanliness of that truck? I think the transport, whether it's in Connex boxes, trucks, or ship holds, that is the place that is missed most often in the supply chain. That can create a lot of introduced problems. Yeah. So backtrack your product.
Yeah, the controls you mentioned there for cigarette beetles, we've got a couple of questions. Michelle, Dr. H.J. Shankar Gowda, he's asking how to control termites in food processing facilities. And also Michael, how do you control pests in pallets used for a warehouse in a brewery facility? Are we talking the same things that you've just mentioned for cigarette beetles?
Not entirely. Termites, someone mentioned termites. I'm sorry, what country are they from? Do you know?
Don't know.
Okay. So, the type of termite determines how it's taken out of a facility. If it's subterranean termites, then it involves drilling through concrete, injecting material into the soil where they live and preventing them from coming up inside. If it's drywood termites, it's looking at the maintenance and availability of wood. If it's Formosan termites, they're the same as subterraneans. So, starting with what type it is and backward into where do they live and come from tells you how to prevent, or tells your pest controller how to prevent them. That is something that you've got to have someone that's experienced in termite management to be able to do that for you.
Okay.
Because it involves quite often the use of drills and such to access into areas underneath concrete. The other thing was because of cigarette beetles, termites, and
the one from Michael was how do you control pests in pallets used for a warehouse in a brewery facility?
Yeah. So, first off, and I hope I don't anger anyone on the attendees by making this statement, but I absolutely hate wood pallets. I would much rather you use plastic pallets that can be cleaned easily. They cost a lot more. Yes. I understand that, but they are so much easier to clean and to prevent pests from being introduced. So wood pallets, making sure that they are heat treated from the suppliers, make sure that they're in good repair. If a pallet has to be repaired, it needs to be reheat treated because the wood that was added to it could be infested and the original heat treatment would not have any, residual value to knock that out. So if you repair pallets or buy used pallets, make sure that they have current treatments with heat. And then, like I said, I love plastic pallets because they are so much easier to clean and maintain, even though they do cost a lot more money.
Yeah, it removes it completely, the issue, doesn't it? Anders, what were the changes to SQF related to rodents? Are you aware of that, Frank?
Yeah, so that's where we were talking about the SQF rodent changes requires that the pest management company document their transfer of information to the client. So in a facility, we would have to document that on this day, we spoke with this person and we informed them of these issues. And that would be how to prevent contaminating the rodent control or damaging the rodent control through cleaning. What to do if someone makes contact with the rodent control device. Where are the rodent control devices? Why are they there? All of that is a documentation that is now required under SQF. And it's really something that your pest management company should do on your behalf. Your side of it is to make sure that they did it and put it into the book so that when the auditor comes in, they can see that, Article 9 has been addressed.
Yeah. Okay, and the questions keep on coming. Luke, should one be worried about chemicals and pesticides residues during IPM?
Yeah, so when pesticides are used, they must be used in accordance to the label directions and the legal requirements in the area, in the country, or in that type of facility, what have you. So I would state that if a product was used correctly, and if IPM systems are followed correctly, the potential for exposure to residue is extremely low, because the product being the pesticides, are not placed where they are going to be in contact with the finished goods. So it's understanding the label requirements of the material, the legal requirements of the country, the city, the state, the industry that you're in, and knowing what it takes to abide by those and do a proper application prevents or reduces the likelihood of that exposure. I was teaching a class, actually yesterday, I was teaching a class to a group of our technicians in the US. And one of the statements I made to them was, if I can see the application of a cockroach bait, it's wrong, because the label directs us to place it into a crack or crevice, not onto, not around, not near, but into. So it's simply following the use directions as approved by the regulatory body in your country prevents that unwanted exposure.
Okay, Vivette, is it allowed to use rodenticide in a chill room?
Is it allowed to use rodenticide in a chill room? So in most food processing, you don't ever, and actually really in any building, I don't think that you should try to use rodenticide inside ever. Rodenticide on the exterior, if it can be done without harming the environment, without exposing protected animals to secondary poisoning potential or anything like that. If it can be done properly on the exterior to prevent rodents from coming in, that's great. And it's what is focused on. But once you cross the threshold indoors, I don't like using rodenticides inside, because I can't control where that animal dies. I would rather trap it so that I can pick it up and dispose of it properly, as opposed to hoping it dies somewhere where I can get to it and remove it. And secondarily, the rodents are nibblers. They don't sit inside this plastic bait station and just eat. They nibble, they fill their mouths up with food, and then they go back to where they're living at, and they hoard that food. They hoard that bait product, that poison that they've taken in. So they nibble on little bits, they carry it back to where they live. And so in some situations, you find these hordes of poison that the rats have moved. And if it's in the wrong place, it can be, it's possible for that material to end up in a product. So, indoors, I really want to use trapping as much as I can. In chill rooms, there are special glue traps made for those cold environments. If it's not a special trap for that, the glue will get too hard to really capture a rodent. But if you're utilizing, or your pest controller is utilizing, the ones that are made for that environment, it will capture them and allow for their proper removal instead of depending on poisons.
Okay, thanks very much, Frank. Nafia, how to effectively control birds in a feed mill?
That's a tough one, because you've got so much stuff in a feed mill that they like. that's a combination of approaches, and I really can't give you a solid answer without, really kind of evaluating a facility and looking at it and determining what type of bird it is and what are their flight patterns and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into designing that type of program. But you got to start with first off someone that can do that knows birds, that understands their flights, their movements, their food preferences, and then working with them to manage exposure of those food products that the birds want and reducing the ability for them to come in somehow. And that is typically with a physical deterrent, not a sound deterrent or anything like that, but physical deterrents to prevent access into those areas. And I really can't answer that question in any detail without, seeing a facility and analyzing it for birds.
Sure. Ebo has expanded on the question. Have you noticed any project topics with regards to IPM in the food industry that I can research on based on your line of experience as an auditor and trainer?
Okay. Yeah. So there are some online food safety courses out there that are very good. In the U.S., the NPMA, the National Pest Management Association, has a training course that's online that is just simply excellent. Some of the auditing companies like AIB has a food safety training that they put online for people. Many colleges around the world have these types of training programs out there available as well. So if you're looking for that type of material, I would say, start with pest control organizations. They certainly have a lot of that material. Some you have to pay for, some is free, depends on the agency, or the organization. Local colleges, universities quite often will have correspondence courses or online courses that can be taken in these types of areas. Some of the certifying bodies have courses that they teach that covers IPM and food safety, or covers HACCP or CGMPs, all of those things. So those are the places that I would look for resources first for that type of material. Your pest controller should have gone through those types of training. So ask them where they source their training material from.
Okay, thanks very much. And Vivette, should bait stations containing rodenticide be fixed in position? Should pelletized rodenticide be used?
Yeah, so in the U.S., there's the requirement of rodenticides have to be in a tamper-resistant device, which means that it has to be fixed in place. It has to be locked and secured with a unique device. The bait has to be secured inside in such a way that it cannot be removed easily by a non-target organism. So that means pellet baits are not used in there, because if it's kicked over or shook around, those can come out. So typically we look at extruded wax block or the soft baits secured on an anchor inside the box so that it cannot come out. That box secured in place and closed with a tool or closed with a mechanism that requires a special tool to open it, such as a key or a screwdriver or something like that.
Okay, right. So we've run half an hour over, but there are 4 questions here. So these will have to be the last 4 questions. So Genzi, Maurice, Jeffrey, and Martin. So we'll answer these, but then we will have to wrap up. Amazing, fantastic questions. Genzi, we've been treating cockroach infestation for quite some time now in our facility. We have sealed gaps, conducted deep cleaning, and did chemical treatments in the area. What are we missing? Do you have any tips on cockroach infestation? How do we treat cockroaches infesting the interiors of our machines and equipment?
Yeah. So, I guess the questions come down to, are they the same cockroaches, or are cockroaches being removed, controlled, and then new ones brought in? Depending on the type of facility that you're in, if you're in a food service or food processing facility, product is coming in daily that potentially is infested with cockroaches, that you always have that potential for continuous introduction. So understanding, okay, if I've got German roaches that are always coming in, if a German roach walks into this building or comes into this building, where are they going to go? Where do they want to go to first? Those animals produce pheromones that are aggregational pheromones that tell other cockroaches that this place where I'm sitting is a great place. Come here. So finding those areas and either treating them physically by closing them, as you said, or chemically, such as putting a bait material or something like that deep inside that potential harborage, so that when those insects go in there, they consume and they die. If it's a matter of continuous introduction, as we said earlier, start tracking it backwards to where they came from. And it has to be fixed there if it's a continuous introduction. If it's a situation of doing chemical applications routinely by your pest controller, they may be creating a problem. And I'm not sure where you're located, but quite often the answer in a lot of these places is thermal nebulization, fogging, which really causes more problems than it solves, because it moves and spreads things out as opposed to killing and controlling. So I would tell you to first sit down with your supplier and analyze what they do and why. And then where do the insects come from? Do they come in from a supplier, or are they just there and have been missed? What type of cockroach is it? Is it German cockroach, American cockroach, Oriental cockroach? What type is it? Because that would focus on, or help focus on, where the source is.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Maurice, if a food manufacturing company chooses to hire an employee to do pest control instead of hiring a company, would that be a problem during a third-party audit? Are you familiar with, well, let's say FSSC 22000, it could be any GFSI standard. Are you familiar with GFSI standards and their expectations towards pest control programs?
Yeah, so you can use an internal staff, provided that they have been properly trained, and whatever applicable licenses are that are required in your area are obtained. So what the audit schemes are looking for is a properly trained, certified individual that is knowledgeable on that. You don't want the person that that sweeps the floors to also be your pest control guy. They need to be trained and certified in the knowledge base required to do that job properly. So the audit schemes have no problem with it, as long as they are certified and trained. Now, the challenge is you're keeping the liability on yourself as opposed to outsourcing the liability. And that's kind of a funny way to look at it. But if you hire an outside agency, if you hired Orkin to do pest control, and a problem occurs, and both of us have done everything that we can and need to do, it's my fault. It's not yours. But if it's your employee, it's your fault.
Yeah, sure. It wasn't a question from Jeffrey. It was just a comment. I started my career in pest control. Such an interesting field, challenging and enjoyable. Problem was at the time I was in pest control, it did not pay very well. And I think this minimizes the effectiveness of pest control companies. There are people who are just focused on the cost. So I don't know when that was or who it was with, but Jeffrey was a pest control. Martin, final question. My pest control provider has suggested implementing some degree of remote rodent monitoring with essentially smart devices. The tech is not yet available to them, but will be within 6 to 12 months. Would this put us ahead of the curve on changing rodent program requirements?
Yeah, so the idea of remote monitoring is it's been around a long time, and in some places it's required by the regulatory agencies and such. I love it. It's a great tool. The danger to remote monitoring, it's a great tool if it's managed properly, but you cannot allow it to take the human out of the system. You still have to have people in there looking and checking and monitoring and making sure that things are right. But what it does is it gives you that 24-hour monitor as opposed to only when the guy's there or person is there doing the work. When you say they're not available yet, I'm assuming that means that in your market area, there's not a manufacturer currently offering them. There are many of them out there. And, Martin, I would tell you that, and anyone else on the in the chat room there, you've got my email there on the screen. You're welcome to send in, for any question that you may have. But, if you can, Martin, if you don't mind, email me with some more details about what you're talking about. And, we might, I can't promise, we may be able to put you in touch with a manufacturer that is able to get stuff in there. But it would be a great tool to give you advantages in your ability to detect problems before they become a major problem. Yes. Okay, super.
Wow. We've gone 1 hour 37 over, but we have done it. That's absolutely brilliant, Frank. Have you enjoyed it?
Yes, I did. I always love the opportunity to talk about this business that has been my life for the last 35 years. And as an entomologist and as a pest controller, you want to talk about the great stuff that's out there. So it's always a pleasure to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I can say on behalf of myself, IFSQN, it's been a wonderful session. Lots of information, and I mean, my favorite part's always the Q&A, and amazing. I think it's a record that 38 minutes over, but we don't like to leave questions unanswered, but yeah, perfect. So appreciate it. Thanks for your time today, Frank, and thanks to Orkin as well. And thanks to everybody on this session for engaging, because that's what makes it work and worthwhile. So brilliant. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Okay. Thank you. Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Okay, ladies and gents, I've loaded in the certificate in the sidebar. So that'll open a new window. You can download that. So that's nice. I'll follow up with the recording, the slides, and I'll also include the certificate as well in the follow-up email afterwards. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and not long to weekend now. So have fun. Stay safe. Thank you. Thanks.